All right, great. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much for joining today's webinar. I'm Kimberly Green, Executive Director of Advanced CTE, and I am so happy to be joining you as today's moderator. Let me tell you, you are in for a real treat this afternoon. This panel was to have happened during our in-person spring meeting that was scheduled earlier this year, and as many things did, that got canceled. And it was to be part of a series of events that we had celebrating Advanced CTE's 100-year celebration. And so while we couldn't have that event in person, I am delighted that we were able to make calendars work to pull together this amazing group of leaders, colleagues, and friends today. Together, our panelists' federal service span over 30 years, and each and every one of our panelists has dedicated their professional lives to helping more learners find their path to meaningful work and family-sustaining wages. They all came to their role through different paths, which to me reflects the beauty of CTE, its diversity and breadth. A lot has happened in CTE and our organization in that span of 30 years. Let me just go through a few of those accomplishments. We adopted the National Career Clusters framework. Our organization changed its name a few times from NASD VTech to NASD CTech. And any of you who have known our community for a long time, you might go ahead in the chat and put what those acronyms mean. And if nobody gets it right, I'll answer that question at the end of the webinar. And today, of course, we're known by Advanced CTE. We expanded our membership to more fully embrace the full continuum of CTE from middle grades through adult post-secondary CTE. We doubled down on our commitment to quality. We've built the visibility for CTE with the public, although there's definitely more work to do there. And we put CTE on the radar of governors and state legislators. We positioned career readiness as a priority in state accountability systems. And more recently, something I'm really proud of, we embraced our responsibility to tackle the challenges of systemic racism and inequities in CTE. And so as you can see, even in many of these, there's more work to do. And as we embark upon our second 100 years beginning in 2021, I look forward to working with you, our members, and our federal partners to continue to advance CTE. Advanced CTE's relationship and partnership with the federal government is a rich and enduring part of our history and evolution. And so for me, this panel is a little bit like walking down memory lane of my career, because Betsy Brand was one of the first people that I met when I came to Washington, D.C. in January of 1993. I was a reception being held in her honor as she transitioned out of her role as Assistant Secretary. And I was just beginning my internship with the organization, and yet her kindness and belief in CTE's power and promise left a lasting impression on me. And it's part of the reason that I'm still doing what I do today. And so as not to play favorites here, I will say that each and every person on this panel has helped me grow personally and has challenged me and our community to push past our comfort zone, to do better and be better, to serve our learners and to advance our community. So before we dig into our robust discussion, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping. This session is going to be recorded and will be on Advanced CTE's website, careertech.org, and on our YouTube channel. We welcome questions throughout, and so if you have questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A box, and we'll attend to them at the end of our webinar. You're also welcome to contribute to the conversation along the way. We'd love for you to be reacting to what you're hearing, share a memory. I don't know if there's a way to share photos, but if you can do that as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start first with a round robin of questions and let all of our panelists introduce themselves. So we'll go in chronological order, starting with Betsy. And we'd love for you to introduce yourself, sharing the administration that you were part of, and give us a sense of what were the perceptions of vocational education at that time. Was it in favor? Was it out of favor? Was it a priority for the administration that you worked for? So Betsy?
Well, Kim, thank you. It is such a pleasure to be on this panel with all of my colleagues. I wish we could have done this in person. It would have been so great to spend time with each of you in person and catch up. And Kim, I just want to say, first of all, congratulations to Advanced CTE. And congratulations to you for your leadership over 30 plus years that you've been in the game, and your organization has done just such a great job. And even after I left the Department of Education, we worked really closely with you. So always been a pleasure. So I guess I'm bringing up the team here starting in 1989. I was in the George H.W. Bush administration, Bush 1, and was there from 89 to 93. I would say that we had pretty good support actually from the administration for a couple of reasons. First of all, obviously the office is both adult ed and career and tech ed, or voc ed back then. And at that time, the first lady was Barbara Bush, and Mrs. Bush had a huge focus on adult literacy. So she knew all about our office. We did all kinds of things with the First Lady in the White House. And I think that focus on literacy kind of spilled over also into vocational education. At the same time, there was a lot of focus on competitiveness. That was the buzzword back in those days, really was competitiveness. That was a big deal. And we had a council on competitiveness, a presidential council on competitiveness. And I think everybody in the administration made a very clear link between competitiveness and workforce and man and woman power, although they probably used the term manpower back then. And then another aspect was that the Vice President, Dan Quayle, who I had worked for, had been extremely heavily involved in the JTPA, back then called the Job Training Partnership Act, which morphed into Workforce Investment Act and other things. But also clearly believed and strongly believed in better education, occupational education and training, and saw that the Perkins Act was an especially important piece of the federal puzzle to promote improved skills for everybody. And I think we also had similar leadership at the Department of Labor at the same time. So I would say the Bush 1 administration was very supportive of career and tech, or voc ed as it was back then. And we had a lot of support in the Hill at the same time. So there was a good feeling for vocational education during the years that I served.
Great. And then up next is Trish. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. I want to just, first of all, echo exactly everything that Betsy said about being here, and Kim about your leadership. It was terrific to work with you, and I'm so glad to be here. So I was in the Clinton administration, and I had a sort of a checkered career there. I started off as a deputy in 1993 to Assistant Secretary Augusta Kapner. And then when she left in 1995 to become president of Bank Street College in New York City, I was acting. And then finally in June of 1996, I got approved by the Senate. And so then I was Assistant Secretary from 1996 till the very last day of the Clinton administration. I think I left the office about 10 o'clock that night, trying to finish up signing letters and stuff like that. Well, I think that in the beginning of the Clinton administration, I'd have to say that voc ed was probably on the outs. The administration was really interested in youth apprenticeship. And of course, we had a big school to work initiative. And some people in the administration really saw school to work as replacing voc ed. They didn't really see the systems aspect of school to work, which voc ed fit into really nicely, but they saw that, you know, we could get rid of voc ed, we could have school to work, and that would be great. So I would say, as I said in the beginning, the other thing that happened is that we were included in the Workforce Investment Act initial legislation. And I think the thinking was that voc ed really belonged in the Department of Labor, and that we should be under the control of the workforce investment boards rather than schools. Well, so that was where we sort of started off. And so as the administration went on, a number of things that we'll probably discuss later, voc ed cachet began rising again, mostly because we did a lot of focus on secondary voc ed, where there was a lot of confusion as to what was the purpose of voc ed at the secondary level. And so we focused on that a lot. And so toward the end, Congress reenacted the Perkins Act, Perkins 3. Voc has remained at the Department of Education, and we did a lot of work in making it much more popular, I would say, within the administration and within Congress.
Great. And one thing, I don't know if you knew this, Trish, but my senior thesis was actually on Senator Simon's Career Pathways Bill, which became the School to Work Opportunities Act in the first 100 days. And that was really why I stayed from being an intern to full-time employee, because I saw that transition. So
I didn't remember, I didn't know that, or I didn't remember it.
Yeah.
But I too worked with Senator Simon on that piece of legislation. So
Yes.
yeah.
Great. All right. So following up, there wasn't any gap then between Trish and Carol was up next as Assistant Secretary.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Kim, for getting us together and for everything that you do for us. And it's an honor to be with this group. And I know the last day, one of the things, Patricia, that you did was reach out to me early on after my appointment. And so that taught me what you're supposed to do. And for the younger colleagues, you know, at my office these days, I said, just join in this webinar and you'll see that people can get along who will come from different parties. It's not about that. It's about the cause, the mission, the purpose. And when you have shared mission, shared purpose, it's really easy to relate to people. And it does happen in Washington every day, believe it or not. So thank you for pulling us all together. I came from a community college before I was appointed. So I wasn't a creature of DC in any sense. I remember when I was announced, my father, who lived in Canada at the time, my appointment was announced and he said, how did this happen? United States is a big country. How did they come to you to do this? I mean, he just couldn't figure out, you know, how a girl from a small town becomes Assistant Secretary of Education. So it was one of the highest honors of my career. And I look at it very fondly. I worked in the George W. Bush administration, his first term. And it was, CTE was not in favor, out of favor, it just was not existent. Everything was about no child left behind. And that was the focus and the obsession. And I think that I was allowed to, you know, peacefully coexist. We did two controversial things. One, School to Work did end under our administration. And then the budget was zeroed out a couple of times. And that's always fun when you have to go to your colleagues and explain, yeah, that your office is not the highest priority, although that changed during the administration. And we'll talk later about what we think some of the most important, I guess, impactful things that we're able to do. But it did change, and I think it just took a lot of understanding what we did. We had to find people in our office, and we were able to show really how CTE did contribute to achievement of young people, and it was an education process over the term, of course.
Great. Well, I will say, I shouldn't say this out loud, but sometimes when something dramatic like that happens, it forces people to come together and pay attention in a way. And I think that is one of my reflections about the budget being zeroed out, was it woke people up and they started doing things differently, including a lot of data collection about the value and promise of CTE. So good things can come out of adversity sometimes. So next up we have Brenda.
Thank you very much, Kim. And I too want to echo my thanks to you for your longstanding leadership of Advanced CTE. You've just done a fantastic job. You're so committed, and you've really helped the organization to grow and develop and be a true force in reform efforts. So I really wanted to acknowledge you. I wanted to say congratulations to the field for the first 100 years of Advanced CTE. We're looking forward to another 100 years thereafter. I would say I was with the Obama administration for 2009, 2014. So I spanned the first term and a little bit into the second term. And I would say some similar remarks to Carol. Voc Ed was not a priority of the Obama administration. As you may recall, they were working on Race to the Top, and four-year college was a big thrust for the administration. And they didn't not like CTE. They just didn't consider it that important of an effort. We were sort of the stepchild. I was used to that because I came from adult education, and adult education was always a stepchild as well. In fact, I do remember, Kim, I'll talk tales out of school, that you were very critical of my appointment because I didn't have a CTE background, that I came in from adult ed. But it helped me be prepared for being viewed as a stepchild in terms of the office. And that changed very dramatically in 2012 when we were able to release our blueprint for a transformed career and technical education system. And I can talk about why that helped to change later on. But that was because when we talked about working on the blueprint, I made a deliberate decision to make it a department-wide initiative and not an initiative of OVE, because I thought we would be marginalized again. And so we embarked on a year-long process of including the entire department in developing the blueprint, and that we were able to change hearts and minds, really, and even the support from the secretary became very strong thereafter. But I'm thrilled to be here with my colleagues. I've had an opportunity to cross paths with them and work with many of them over the years, and it's just wonderful to be here with everybody. So thank you.
Thank you. And I will say, we always say that if someone starts out and we're going to critique them, they eventually become one of our fiercest advocates. And that was certainly the case with you, Brenda. So thank you. And last but not least, our sitting Assistant Secretary and one of our, I think the only CTE director that's ever been Assistant Secretary, Scott Stump. So Scott.
Thank you, Kim. And it is a pleasure to be in such good company. Yeah, it's a unique club that I have seen all of the rest of the individuals on this panel up in front of me speaking, whether as a teacher or as a state director of CTE, or in my work with FFA in the Career and Technical Student Organization space, seeing you at National Convention. Yeah, thank you for the work that you've done to get us to this point. And thank you, Kim, for organizing and getting us all together. Yes, and so I was confirmed in the summer of 2018 for the current administration, and have been blessed to have worked for an administration and a secretary that look at career and technical education with a completely different lens than some of their predecessors. And so our office has had full latitude, not just within career and tech, but also within adult ed, to do some really cool things. In fact, one of our agency priority goals today is around multiple pathways, specifically related. The metrics are to increasing the number of integrated education and training opportunities in adult ed, and expanding the number of certificates and degrees granted in STEM pathways that are in demand within the CTE space. And so it's, again, going back to Brenda, making it a department-wide agenda has shown such great benefit. And I will just tell you that this administration was about the American worker. And so I've had a fun little playground to work within. And, you know, the high point of that would have been last spring with the budget request of increasing Perkins by $750 million, not quite doubling, but getting pretty close. And then I just have to give a shout out today. And I saw it on ACTE's Twitter, and Kim, yours coming out of, you know, the Senate budget, including a $75 million increase. And none of that would have happened without all of these years worth of beating the drum and saying, you know what, CTE is a value, and students of all ages and types and backgrounds need access to this environment. So pleasure to be here.
Great. All right. Well, I knew this was going to be a tough chore to kind of keep us on time, but I'm going to do the one final kind of round robin question, which is if you can kind of speed round it. What would you say was your proudest accomplishment during your tenure as Assistant Secretary? And Scott, we'll start with you and then go back.
I will be very quick, and I brought along props.
Oh, yes.
So
be bold.
Be bold. There you go. You know, the whole conversation about Perkins 5, and I have to admit, I took a very hands-off approach, which honestly, I know really messed with the minds of maybe not some of the state directors, but some of their compliance specialists or their director of Perkins, by not telling them exactly and providing frequently asked questions or guidance. We wanted them to paint on an open palette. And I know for the first couple of months that created a little stress among them, but I know that the team here at Octave did such a phenomenal job, our regional coordinators, of answering individual questions as opposed to painting with a broad brush and giving states latitude, like in Delaware, to create a whole different formula for how they're funding their adult ed programs and their post-secondary measure to meet their needs. Yeah, it was just a great way. And when I looked at the plans coming in this summer and last spring, yes, absolutely. I would have liked for some to be maybe a little more bold. That can happen in the future, but I saw lots and lots of things that as a former state director, I'm excited to see where they will take students in the future.
Great. Brenda.
So I'm going to say two things. One, of course, is the blueprint to transform CTE. And I think the 4 core principles that were embedded in the blueprint are very relevant still today. And then second, I would say the name change. We went from Ove to Octave. That was a big win. And I also just want to give a shout out to all the Octave staff that are on the call today. And thank you for your service throughout. For you served all of us so well. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Carol.
Well, I don't know who did the relocation, but somebody should take credit for that relocation to those new offices. So is that you, Brenda? I don't know who oversaw the location change, but that went a long way to the esteem of the office and to the folks who worked in the office as well. I'd say 2 things. For us, one was the data focus that Kim talked about. George W. Bush, I worked under Rod Page, but Margaret Spellings had the saying, "In God we trust, all others bring data." So we really did force the field to get much more diligent about recording the great successes. And so I think that was a plus. I also think that my own personal goal was to really get community colleges much more involved in the CTE. In some states, they just weren't at all. And I came from a community college. Brenda and her office took that mantle and put it on steroids. And I was really pleased about that. So those are 2 things. And then it got authorized too under the George W. Bush's administration as well.
Great. Thanks, Carol. Trish. Oh, are you muted still? Oh, you're still muted.
Senior moment. I'm really focused on secondary education because a lot of the administration's push was on K through 12. And I want VOCED to be intricately connected to that. So I pushed on secondary education. So I've got really 3 things: the New American High Schools Initiative, which really involved VOCED and integrating academic and VOCED standards, the building linkages, which you're going to talk about later, but the career clusters, again, really suggesting that VOCED was different than it had been, and professional development for teachers and educators. Right at the end of the administration, we did a number of conferences where we brought together teams of academic and vocational instructors at the secondary level to really, and post-secondary as well, to really to think about how we change things. So all of those things sort of ended or led to the passage of Perkins 3, which incorporated a lot of those ideas, particularly at the secondary level. So I say that's what I concentrated on, and that's what I'm most proud of.
That's great. And Betsy.
Well, I think our biggest accomplishment was the implementation of tech prep. So for those of you who recall back into 88, 89, when the law was passed, or I guess it was 1990, Bill Ford was a strong presence. Carl Perkins himself, the congressman from Kentucky, Bill Goodling, John Erlenborn. We had very senior leadership in both parties really pushing for this new idea of tech prep, which was to link the last 2 years of high school with 2 years of community college and to build out into the workforce and to provide workplace learning. So it was kind of the first time that all these ideas were brought together. And Dale Parnell from the American Association of Community Colleges, Dan Hull at CORD, really were also amazingly helpful on the ground to not only promote these new philosophies for vocational education, but also to work with people on the ground to implement it. But we did a lot of amazing outreach as we were, Scott, developing the regulations, which we did develop regulations. And I just, one tiny little thing that I was very proud of, we took the general counsel's staff on the field meetings, because when they were writing the regulations, they would write things and they didn't know why they were writing them. And we said, you know what? You're coming with us to listen to the state directors, to the superintendents, to the principals, to the teachers, to the students, to the parents, the business people, the community college leaders, everybody, so that when you're writing these regulations, you'll have a better sense of what the field needs. And as a result, I think Tech Prep really had a huge impact on vocational education in general, and showed up as part of School to Work, has shown up as part of career clusters, programs of studies, and on. And in some cases, in some states, is still kind of the foundation for career tech ed.
Thanks, Betsy. I think that is the one thing that is so amazing to me when I listen to all of you talk is the connectedness and the through line. Despite different people, different leadership, different times in our country, there's been this constancy of moving the field forward and building on what happened before. So that is exciting. All right, so I have got some questions. Hopefully this will be more of a discussion. We won't go down the list, but feel free to jump in if you have something to contribute. And so the first question I have up is for Brenda. So as I said at the start, we're celebrating our 100-year anniversary, and over the course of history, you even nodded to this in your introduction, that our relationship with Cte has always been strong. Sometimes it was strained, and other times it was more coherent and collaborative. So could you share a memory or a reflection on the relationship that Cte had with Advanced CTE and how we worked together to move our community forward?
I'd be happy to. You were an extraordinary partner, and I know you still are. I know Scott would attest to that, in really helping to push the field. I do remember one anecdote where we decided internally to come up with our own recommendations for reauthorization. And you were a little miffed, if I recall, thinking, well, we ought to be doing that first, and then you should be deciding whether you support our recommendations or not. And we said, no, I think we're going to change that equation this time, and we're going to come out with our own recommendations. But true to who you are, Kim, is a great partner. You just rolled up your sleeves and gave us feedback, positive and negative, to our recommendations, and then we just continued to work together. But I do remember that that you were quite surprised that we took the lead on that.
Great. I don't have a really good poker face, that is for sure. So anybody else have a moment, a reflection they want to add on?
Well, of course, Kim, I would just say, you know, that, and I was going to allude to this when we talk about the next question, but basically, you know, the work that your organization and you in particular did and embraced really around building linkages was absolutely fantastic. That would never have gone as far as it has without your leadership. And I always loved working with you. I loved going to your meetings, always at interesting places.
Yeah.
So I give you so much credit, and the whole organization for so much credit in your leadership in that area.
Well, maybe you can share a little more about the, I'm not sure everybody knows that building linkages led to the career clusters framework. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about, because the 16 clusters really, I remember Vicki Sheree and Bob Sheets came up with the 16. And so kind of why they were established and what your aspirations were for the initiative. And now reflecting back on it, did we live up to those aspirations?
Sure. Well, you know, I was thinking about that. I had to really reach back to remember all the different things that led into that. Fortunately, I'm a kind of a pack rat, so I had quite a few memos and copies of speeches I could go and look through. But basically, I have to give Betsy a lot of credit, because in Perkins 2, there was language about trying to broaden voc ed to focus on all aspects of the industry. So that really laid the groundwork, I think, for the building linkages and the career clusters initiative. Then in about, I think, 1995, I went to Denver to American Vocational Association, which it was then called, conference. And I met with a group of technology and information technology people who had been associated with VOCA over a long period of time. And I asked them, so what could we as an office, because I was new then as acting assistant secretary, what could we as an office do to help you in the work that you're doing at the local level? And they said, oh gosh, several old timers there said, you know, once upon a time, the office was really looked at as a source of information, real knowledge about very different career choices, vocational areas. They provided technical assistance. They did a lot of things to help us. And now most of that expertise has sort of vanished. We didn't have a lot of money to hire new staff, so we had to think of something else. Then, do you remember the meeting of the of your group in Whitefish, Montana, where we had the conversation about family secrets? You know, we come here, we get together, we all enjoy each other's company. We talk about how VOCA is so great, but there's something sitting in the middle of the table there, just like at Thanksgiving, that nobody talks about, and that is, we're losing support for VOCA, and what are we going to do about it? And we really need to think about a new mission. So those two things got me going and thinking about career clusters. Also, in School to Work, there's some research money to do research on skill standards. The National Skill Standards Board that was set up as part of Goals 2000, I was an ex officio member of that. So they were exploring these career clusters. So we got together we took School to Work money, OVE money, and Skill Standards Board money, and we supported the beginning of the first three clusters. I think there was manufacturing, health services, and business and administration. And from there, we've expanded that. And as I say, toward the end of the administration, without your help, we never would have been able to go to the full 16. And so that's history. That's the history of it, as far as I can remember.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I mean, I remember we were we used to have 3 meetings a year as an organization, and we held one of our meetings in conjunction with ACTE's conference, and we were in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the RFP came out for their career clusters, and
Right.
Anderson of Oklahoma said, well, why should all the states go after them individually? We should have us as a whole community go after them together, with all 50 states behind one RFP. And that was previously, I don't think we had ever done anything like that. And so kind of getting everybody mobilized around one initiative together, for us, that was really transformative, I think, to move us from vocational education to embrace what the aspirations were of not just the name change, but what was different about CTE.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. Thanks. Any other reflections on that, on career clusters? All right. Well, I mentioned in my list of things that I was proud of that we have finally started to take on the deep work that is necessary to do as a country and in our community around equity. And I will say, kind of shamefully, this is not a space that our organization had focused on for many years. And so, Betsy, I'm kind of wondering now, with the kind of person with the longest tenure, what your perspectives are around issues around equity and the progress that we've made, if any, as a community, and what's the work still to be done in this space?
That's the easy question, huh? Well, I mean, at the heart of so much, and a really important topic. A little side note on your leadership, I actually remember having a conversation with you probably after I had left the Department of Education about trying to move the field, and how there were some state leaders who were a little stuck in their beliefs, maybe a lot stuck in their beliefs. and how difficult it was to kind of help people move forward. And you said, I can only go so far and so fast without losing everybody. But you just kept kind of, as Howard Yelm, who some of you knew at the Department of Ed, he would always say, just get the camel's nose under the tent and you can just keep working it. And I think you started doing it many years ago. You know, I think this is an issue that we have been hampered by for decades. You know, we knew that there's a huge gender problem. And I think we had set asides in the law to deal with gender issues and special populations and students with disabilities, but we really never had anything in the law or any you know, other guidance about racial issues and inequities. And they exist and they're there then, and we need to deal with them. So at least first of all, when I was at the American Youth Policy Forum, we started working together on these equity issues. And so I'm so happy that you guys are continuing that work and leading it in a really positive way. There's just so much to be done. You know, data is a huge part of it. I think data is something that we still need to get a better handle on so that we understand what the demographics and the data really are telling us. And then just to be, you know, honest about resource sharing and look at some of the schools and the cities and the neighborhoods that aren't performing and really understand like why. Is it a resource question? Is it an issue of the teachers and the capacities that exist? And unfortunately, what we're going through right now with all this online learning, unfortunately, is only going to exacerbate a lot of these gaps, which scares me to pieces, unfortunately. So I think we just have to get the nose of the camel under the tent, just keep pushing, asking the hard questions, and moving forward as quickly as we can. But I congratulate you and Advanced CTE for taking this on and really bringing it to light.
So Kim, can I jump in on that one? Well,
Yes.
Betsy, I think we've got more than the nose under the tent at this point. I don't know if it's a 1 or a 2 hump camel, and I don't remember what the right names are for either one of those, but I think we got at least 1 hump well started underneath there. And I just want to highlight and say thank you to all of the states for taking the comprehensive local needs assessment, which, yes, included a scan of the economic and labor trends within that community, but at the heart of it is a disaggregated data analysis by a group of people, not just the teacher, not just the counselor, not just the superintendent, but of business leaders and other representatives of those special populations, really taking an intentional look and saying, where are the gaps? And, you know, that wouldn't have come without those incremental pieces among all of your tenures and without a constant approach to say, all students need access to high quality career and technical education. And, you know, the technology came along with us. When you talk about Ohio's ability to drill down with the GPS and reinforce, the GIS map, and all of a sudden be able to look and pinpoint this type of student doesn't have access to a health program. And then we can start to work on it. And so I just appreciate, and I know for the states, Victoria Crownover, I give you a shout out, you and the data crew with LV, that, you know, to be able to provide that data out to the school districts, knowing that they can't do it in essence themselves, what a lift each of the state leaders that are on here have done. Thank you for doing that. I think it's going to pay huge dividends as we continue to move forward. My hope is that in the next less than a decade, in the next 4 or 5 years, we will not have a need for methods of administration, which some of you know what I'm talking about, because it will be so embedded in the fabric of how we do business.
Brenda, you're smiling off. Do you want to add in, and then Trish?
Sure, I'd love to. You know, let's be honest about it. For a long time, CTE was a dumping ground for students that folks didn't think were college material. And it was, a lot of it was based on race and ethnicity. And so we had a long haul to change that trajectory. And we really have. And Scott, you've done a tremendous job in that regard. And Kim, you know, I don't think you came late to it. I think you came just in time to really change the discourse and to make sure that as a field we were focused on closing and eliminating equity gaps, because it was a system that really didn't respect all of our students equitably. And we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that there are equitable pathways, career pathways for all of our students. But I can remember going on a visit to a very high quality program and being really dismayed that all of a sudden these bioengineering programs now were being favored by white students who had access to a 4-year degree, and they understood the benefits of career and technical education, that they were getting certifications at the same time, et cetera. So I said, boy, then we've really changed the discourse now when all students want to get into high quality career pathways, but we have a long ways still to go, but we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Trish.
No, I was going to give a little historical perspective, what I think on that. I was worked for Congressman William Steiger from Wisconsin back in the 60s. And we were involved, he was on the Education Labor Committee in the House, and we were involved in the amendments to the 63 Act, which, so in 68, I think it was passed. So that gets to really what Brenda was talking about, because at that time, it was the focus to, okay, we had the Great Society, we had the focus of poverty programs. And so the formula was changed to really try to target areas where there were low income kids and kids of color. And it actually had, because of where we were as a country at that time, it actually had a lot of negative impacts in that the voc ed became non-college bound, a place to put those kids. And so it was, I think, all the efforts, tech prep, school to work, new American high schools, all of those things are trying to say, wait a minute, we need good programs for all kids. Voc ed needs to be part of integrated. We have to raise the academic standards of kids in voc ed. We have to, and for the programs, we have to raise the quality of the skills training. And so now I think we are where we are, and we are going forward, which is great. But you know, sometimes there are unintended consequences to what happens in legislation. It takes good people to undo those things.
Yes. Yes. Well, I'm going to pivot a little bit here and talk about our partnership with the employer community, because that is certainly foundational to the being of CTE. And we know Betsy talked about competition with globalization, automation, even COVID-19 is impacting the way we work and the future of work. So Carol, I'm wondering if you could share with us your perspectives on how CTE's relationship with the employer community has changed over time, and how you think that it should be evolving in the face of what we're facing now as a country.
Well, thank you. I think that Scott, you know, you guys, when you put out the latest RFP, really sent the signal that this is about the connection to work and careers, and it caused a lot of a flurry in the States. Like, why is you know, that office putting out a work-based RFP? So it got a lot of people's attention. So good for you. I think that you know, it really does have, we do have to start blurring the lines more between education and work. And at Strata, we support a lot of initiatives that do that. We support the Paul Quinn working college model, where students work 2 days a week. They go to school 3 days a week. This integration of work and school, I think CTE could certainly pave the way for that to happen. And as I look to the future, somebody asked the question in the chat, what's it going to look like in the next few years? Maybe I'm getting ahead of you, Kim, but I really do think that this merger, this blurring of the lines between work and education, CTE could show how it's done. And if a 16 or 17-year-old can decide whether or not to go to school, they ought to be able to decide that they want to work and get their education at the same time. CTE is in the best position to make that happen. So probably ruffling a few feathers out there amongst our our listeners, but that's what I did when I was in the Bush administration. So I'm continuing that reputation. But I think it's time to forge some new models and be bold there, Scott, and look for some people who really want to say, especially with the equity agenda, because the access to employers, the access to people who work, the access to mentors who work should not be for the middle and upper class. And I think that it goes to the equity agenda on giving access to that kind of cultural capital to all people, not just the families who can afford it and have those in their Rolodex. So I see a great opportunity for CTE in the future, but it's going to take some boldness. I don't know, Scott, I got to put you on the spot there, but I'll let you maybe give you a chance.
That's all right. You know, Kim, you asked the question of Brenda earlier about those moments when there might have been tension between Advanced CTE and maybe even ACTE and our office. And that might have been one of them when the grants weren't to community colleges. They weren't to post-secondary education institutions. They were to the state workforce boards. Well, you know, to truly pull those individuals off the sidelines that really need that retraining. We wanted to send a message. I will tell you the other thing too, and this goes in part to that next question that we're starting to get into, this notion of how has federal policy influenced the direction of CTE. I will tell you, I'm a firm believer, full disclosure, my dad started teaching and was trained as a CTE teacher under Smith Hughes. He spent his career then teaching under the 63 Act and through the next 3 acts. So he had 5 under his belt before he retired. I came in midway through, but then since then have covered the other 5. So in our family, we have really geeky Perkins CTE conversations, just got to admit. But in fact, my mom watched the work-based learning presentation this morning and gave me a thumbs up. So I got that from her, got that from the secretary, and a thumbs up from my wife. So I've had a beautiful day. I just want to tell you. But we would not have had to have the comprehensive local needs assessment codified in law if we in CTE had been doing our business of staying connected to employers. And I will tell you, one of the things policy-wise that changed, and we see it on the screen and we've heard it in the stories, our focus became about academic integration because of the federal policy at the time and having to connect to that to really be viable in this institution we call the Department of Education. And granted, we did that well. And I will tell you, I know we crosswalked more competencies to both math, science, and language arts than you can imagine. We did our job there. But I think we're being called both in policy and in practice and by communities across the nation to return to our roots and connect to employers in a completely different way and really blur those lines, Carol, as you laid out, between the classrooms and the workplaces.
Well, did anybody want to build on the question that Scott kind of started to lean into, which is a question around the influence and role of federal policy, and wondering, in my time, I've seen kind of federal policy being the tail that wagged the dog. And then for a time, it kind of pivoted and really the states were leading. And the latest round, I think, of federal policy really reflected what was happening in states. And so seeing that balance and relationship and partnership between the federal government and state governments. Anybody want to take that on, that question? Scott, do you want to dive in a little more and then we'll go from there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just start it off with, I think middle school came out of, the states really leaning into that area and starting earlier with the exploration and then the law finally catching up and taking away the arbitrary age and then making it clearly 5th grade. You can absolutely giving that permission, that safe harbor to spend the funds in that space. And then when we also think about work-based learning and adding that in and really making that clear, that's a pathway. The other piece is that I do think the law added in the innovation and modernization grant funds as an opportunity because senators and legislators and others kept hearing about these wonderful programs and really, those that were stepping out and moving in new directions and then saying, let's make a space for them. And let's really figure out where we can put investments into growing them. So a lot of good things coming from the states, I believe.
Anybody else want to lean in on that?
I'll just say, I think it's an important partnership. I don't think you can have one or the other. I think you have to have an equal partnership, and they're both very important to this equation. The feds can really push the larger issues, and then the states have to be responsive to their employer community and their needs. So I don't think it's an either or proposition really, but a strong partnership.
Great.
But, you know, having said that, I think Betsy and Trish, I mean, federal policy had a huge impact on the field with tech prep. I was working in the field at the time. You know, I read those books by those authors you talked about, and Purnell. I mean, I just was fascinated, and Trish, the school to work. I mean, it really had a real impact. You can, and career pathways. I mean, it can set the tone, Scott, with the youth apprenticeship, work-based learning. And so I'm not really a federal policy, you look to the feds to solve all the problems, but, it really in CTE has really made some changes going back to Smith Hughes. There's just a history of the federal government really leading in this way. And so I would hate to lose that really. Most of the time we sort of get it right, and the field responds and takes it to another level.
Yeah, and Carol, I would just add to that.
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I would go back to what Scott said, that my experience oftentimes is that the ideas really do emerge from the field though. And so I think with tech prep and school to work, it was this bubbling up of innovation coming from communities, very strong communities that had very strong partnerships between their high schools and their community colleges. They weren't dictated by the federal government. They emerged more naturally. And from those experiences, I think then we all learned, and Dale Parnell and others learned by looking at the best of the best out in the field. And then, you get enough of that evidence, and then the federal government can kind of push it forward and give the federal imprimatur, and then try to hold people responsible and accountable to some extent. But my experience has always been that the best ideas emerge from the field, and that we just really, as Brenda said, it's really a partnership. We have to be good listeners at the federal level.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, Kim, the organization, Advanced CTE, the leadership summits that have been once every 5 years, is that correct? So for the past 15 years, have been instrumental in getting a cohesive thought in the field and really laying out some big picture ideas that then I do believe find their way into that legislative language and into the work of the states, so that it bubbles up from there into the future policy.
I would just like to add to that point that you made, Scott, because Kim, I remember you really pushed the field to think more broadly and more globally before they were even ready to do that. And you didn't shrink from that responsibility. You got a lot of pushback from your members, and you just continued to do what was right for our students. And so you deserve a lot of credit for not saying, well, I'm just going to take the easy path and take the path of least resistance. You just pushed them to be forward thinking and to make sure the students had the full benefit of strong, high quality programs.
Well, thanks. Trish, I know you've been trying to jump in, and as I
No problem.
you, I'll just say that in that spirit, I will never forget when we were trying to advocate for the career clusters. People thought that was the end of vocational education because we were selling out to academic education. And I was called a communist more than once. I don't really understand why career clusters were a communist plot, but I've added that to my agenda, so that my resume. So Trish, I'm trying to jump in.
The big C, big C's, right? Career clusters and communism. Well, I never heard of that. Fortunately, I guess I left town, so I never really was around for that phase. I guess I would say that it always was my experience that, as Betsy said, that there are always a few places where people in the states and at the local level have moved ahead, have moved beyond where the legislation is or where most people are practicing. And then when the federal government picks up something and begins to push it, we never really had that much money behind it, but it's amazing how a field responds to those innovations. So I think that as everyone has really said, it's that combination of the field coming up. So some of those people that are leaders in the field coming up with ideas, researchers coming up with ideas and new approaches. And then the federal government taking a look at those things, saying, this really makes sense, and pushing that. And just with a little bit of money, it has a great deal of influence. I mean, I think whether you do regs, Betsy did regs, we did guidance. Scott, it sounds like you just said, hey, here's the law, follow it, But however that goes, people really do respond. And then when you have groups like Advanced CTE pushing things and as partners, then it spreads rapidly and quite widely.
Great. Well, we are getting near to the end of our time, and I think some of the questions that were in the chat, we actually already had embedded in the questions. So I think we'll do our final round robin, which does, I think, address some of the questions in the Q&A, which is kind of, as you think about the future, kind of what's the most urgent priority that you would Implore CTE to take on? And I won't pick. Whoever wants to go first can go first.
Well, I think it's the equity issue. I think there are two, really. I think it's an equity issue that we just can't lose sight of, and that we just definitely have to try to figure out how to help every single young person gain the skills and knowledge that they need to be successful. And also, I think a few of you referenced it in your comments, this blending between the in-school learning and the out-of-school learning. Formal learning, informal learning, whatever you want to call it. The world is changing so dramatically, as we've just seen in the last 6 to 9 months. And knowing that kids learn so much outside of school, like 90% of their time is out of school anyway. So let's really capitalize on ways to help young people get and really benefit from that learning in some more organized fashion, as opposed to just random learning that goes on and on. But I think Scott was talking about new models, and it really is a new way of thinking about where learning occurs and how it occurs, and the partners and the people that need to be involved in that. So, and Carol, your comments about work-based learning and employers are spot on as well. So I think equity and this blending, or just breaking down the barriers of where learning happens.
Great, thanks, Betsy.
I would add equity also is always very important for all of us to consider, but I still remain concerned about the post-secondary career and technical education programs. They are sort of on their own in many instances because they're faculty-driven processes and programs. And I'd like us to really tackle that as the next frontier, how to bring them into the fold so that the programs really, there's a articulated seamless pathway from secondary to post-secondary. Students don't have to retake courses, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's still work for us to do there.
I'd like to add on to that, Kim, if I could. And I think it's more than that. It's really CTE leading the way on a third way. Wasn't that somebody's theme here? Our surveys at Strata, we do surveys of consumers, and what they're looking for is a way to blend the traditional academic learning with a technical skill. And the bachelor's degree is, the value is being perceived as not as valuable as it once was or could be. They're looking for a skill-based experience, but it can't be just the technical skills. So this blending and giving a third way, I think CTE could lead the way, but it's going to take your magic, Kim, into how to construct that for an agenda for your members. Okay. But people want that purposeful education that doesn't force them to make that choice of technical skill or academic.
Yeah, I think actually that's where we've, from Betsy on, that's where we've all tried to push the field, I think, is this integration of academic and technical skills. And so when you come out of high school and you're ready to go to college, then you've got a basis for whatever you want to pursue in college. And when you come out of a 2-year program or a technical institute at the post-secondary level or 4-year, you're not just, not that there's anything wrong with a liberal arts degree or a political science degree, which I had, but you know, you're coming out with a set of skills that are really useful to you. The other thing I think, and I think the pandemic has really brought this all to our attention, is the fact that we need to think about how are we going to do CTE online. In Washington State, there was just an article in the paper about a month ago about this teacher in Renton who had spent a lot of time this summer with a group of people, employers and teachers, and came up with a program for manufacturing technologies that can be delivered completely online, which I think is fascinating. So I'm thinking that there must be other places around the country that are experimenting with this, and it'd be really good to pull those things together and try to find out what's the best approach, because people will say, oh, you can't do CTE, it's hands-on, what you know, how can you do that online, you know? But we've got to figure out ways to do that, I think, for the future.
And that provides a perfect place for me to step in, Patricia, because you're exactly right. In fact, there had the time over the past 2 years to spend time with a professor from Purdue University who has an NSF grant because they did a series of what they called convergence accelerators to really say, where does the new space live in training the workers or the employees of the future. And he's created a rapid gathering system that creates an augmented reality. So it's not even virtual reality. It actually looks and feels like a manufacturing floor, and the learners can go into it and do the exact tasks that they need to do in an augmented space. And I would say that that's for a couple of reasons, going back to what everyone else has laid out. If we're going to solve the equity problem, you know, in Stoneham, Colorado, we're never going to be able to have a full-time IT instructor or a health instructor. So for our kiddos to have access to those multiple career pathways, which, you know, Patricia, 16 of them is awful hard to do for a small school board. We can't afford all of those. So how do we come up with different ways of ensuring that every student has access to all of those? It's going to have to be through concurrent enrollment, dual enrollment. It's going to have to be through new delivery techniques, virtual. That's going to shake up a whole lot of state policies related to education, from a competency-based versus seat time concept to a who's the instructor of record, so that employers can step in and provide the skills. Again, I go back to, we've got to start with what's right for the learner and then push against anything that limits their ability to get the learning they need at that time, the knowledge and skills for the right next step in their life. So I agree with everyone.
Well, thanks, Scott.
Keep pushing.
We are working on writing the vision that came out of the summit, the third summit that we held in September, and I feel very validated about the direction that it's going based on the wisdom, because I think the points you've all made all show up in that. So we're already over time, so I could chat with all of you for the rest of the afternoon, but I want to respect everyone's schedules and close out by saying thank you to Betsy, Trish, Carol, Brenda, and Scott for joining us today, for your mentorship, your friendship, for challenging us, and for your leadership. You've all had an indelible impact on CTE, and I hope that you take pride in that, and I hope that you know that we all appreciate you. As the chat is coming in, everyone is saying the same things, and that I know that our work often is inherently kind of multiple steps away from the learners that benefit from the policy work that we do, but I hope that we can all step away realizing that we truly have changed the lives of millions for the better. And there's more work to be done, but I am confident that working with you all, those of you who are not in, I don't call it retirement, preferment, doing what you prefer, and those of you who are still working in the policy space, we're looking forward to collaborating with you. And thanks to everybody who joined the webinar today. Before you leave, there's going to be an evaluation that's going to pop up, so please give us your feedback. We really do appreciate it. And those of you who are very interested in continuing this federal conversation, we will have another webinar on Thursday. We're going to be digging into the Perkins 5 plans of states for another webinar at 2 p.m. to walk through kind of the themes that we saw emerging in those state plans. So thanks to each of you. Thanks to everybody joining us today. Stay healthy. and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, Kim. Bye.
Great
Thank
to
you.
see everybody.
Bye-bye.
Care.